Hollywood has a long memory. It remembers the blockbusters, the award ceremonies, the tearful acceptance speeches, and the carefully curated images that stars spend entire careers building. But it also remembers something else: the quiet grudges, the backstage Cold Wars, and the relationships that never quite healed no matter how many smiles were plastered on for the cameras. Ron Howard is a man who has spent the better part of 7 decades in this industry. First as a cherub-faced child actor that an entire nation fell in love with, and later as one of the most respected directors Hollywood has ever produced. He is measured, thoughtful, and famously slow to anger. That reputation is real and well-earned. But even the most patient man alive has people in his past he would rather forget. And for Ron Howard, one name stands above the rest. One person made his early years genuinely miserable. One co-star whose icy presence cast a long shadow over what should have been the most magical chapter of a young boy's life. This is the story of who that person was, why Howard despised them, and what it ultimately revealed about the hidden world lurking behind Mayberry's cheerful front porch. To understand the tension, you first have to understand the world Ron Howard was dropped into as a small child. The Andy Griffith Show premiered on CBS on October 3rd, 1960, and it ran for 8 beloved seasons, producing 249 episodes before its final bow in April of 1968. To the millions of American families who gathered around their television sets week after week, the show was a sanctuary. It was gentle, warm, and deeply comforting in a way that felt almost radical during one of the most turbulent decades in American history. While the 1960s roared and crackled with social upheaval, political assassinations, and cultural revolution, Mayberry sat quietly apart from all of it, offering a vision of small-town life so tender and uncomplicated that viewers practically ached for it. At the center of that world was Sheriff Andy Taylor, played with effortless, drawling charm by Andy Griffith himself. Griffith was the anchor of the entire enterprise, a performer of remarkable natural instinct who understood better than almost anyone how to make a scene feel lived in and real. Alongside him stood the unforgettable Deputy Barney Fife, brought to riotous, twitchy life by Don Knotts, a comedic genius whose physical performances earned him 5 Emmy Awards. And completing the family portrait at the heart of the show was Aunt Bee Taylor, the warm and fussy homemaker who kept the Taylor household running with her cooking, her gentle lectures, and her seemingly bottomless reserves of small-town common sense. Aunt Bee was played by Frances Bavier, a formally trained actress of considerable pedigree. And it is Frances Bavier who sits at the center of this story. Young Ron Howard, credited in those early years simply as Ronnie Howard, joined this world as Opie Taylor, the cherub-faced, wide-eyed son of Sheriff Andy. He was just 6 years old when filming began, a child navigating an adult professional environment with cameras, lighting rigs, scripts, and the particular pressures that come with performing on a major network television production. Howard has spoken in various interviews over the years about the genuine warmth that Andy Griffith showed him during those formative years. Griffith was, by nearly all accounts, a generous scene partner and a quietly protective presence for the young boy on set. He was the kind of man who could put a child at ease simply by being steady and kind, and Howard has repeatedly acknowledged the profound influence Griffith had on him as both a performer and a person. But Frances Bavier was a different story entirely. Frances Bavier was born on December 14, 1902, in New York City. She was a product of the Columbia University School of Dramatic Arts and had spent decades treading the boards of stage and screen before she ever set foot in Mayberry. By the time the Andy Griffith Show came calling, she was already nearly 60 years old, a veteran performer with exacting standards, a deep sense of professional pride, and a personality that those who worked with her often described as deeply private, sometimes to the point of being cold. On screen, Aunt Bee was warmth and comfort personified. She was the woman you wished was your own aunt, bustling around a sunlit kitchen, dispensing homespun wisdom, and fussing lovingly over the people she cared about. The character was a masterpiece of cozy domesticity. But the woman who played her was almost the polar opposite in her personal interactions. Where Aunt Bee was soft and open, Frances Bavier was guarded and precise. Where Aunt B radiated unconditional acceptance, Frances Bavier maintained a careful, deliberate distance from almost everyone around her. This was not simply a matter of shyness or introversion, though those qualities certainly played a role. Bavier was a woman of extremely high professional standards who expected everyone in her orbit to operate at the same exacting level she demanded of herself. She was deeply particular about how she was directed, how she was photographed, and how her performance was shaped from scene to scene. Any suggestion from a director or fellow cast member that required her to adjust her positioning, her timing, or her interpretation of scene could be met with significant resistance. Howard Morris, who played the memorable recurring character Ernest T. Bass and also sat in the director's chair for several episodes of the show, once described the experience of directing Bavier as an exercise in careful navigation, where even the most straightforward professional request could suddenly become a complicated standoff. Now, consider all of that from the perspective of a small boy. Ron Howard was not a jaded industry professional when he first encountered Frances Bavier. He was a child, dependent on the adults around him to create a safe and nurturing environment on set. Andy Griffith did that for him. Don Knotts did that for him in his own wonderfully goofy way. But Frances Bavier, the woman who was literally playing his on-screen aunt and caregiver, was someone he could never quite reach. The warmth that Bavier performed with such apparent ease in front of the cameras simply did not extend to her interactions with young Ronnie Howard when the director called cut. Howard has been characteristically measured in how he has discussed this over the years. He is not a man who traffics in sensationalism or cruelty, and he has never set out to damage Bavier's legacy, which he clearly respects on a professional level. But the truth has emerged gradually, in interviews and reflections spread across decades, and the picture it paints is consistent. Bavier was not a warm presence for him. She was not the nurturing figure off-screen that she embodied on it. She kept her distance, she maintained her walls, and the natural warmth that a child might reasonably hope to receive from the woman playing his beloved aunt was simply not forthcoming. One famous example that has been cited repeatedly involves the episode known to fans as the Pickle Story, which aired in 1961. In the episode, Opie must eat jar after jar of Aunt Bee's notoriously terrible homemade pickles to spare her feelings after everyone agrees the pickles are inedible. It is one of the show's most beloved and frequently cited comic sequences. What the laughing audience at home had no way of knowing was that Ron Howard genuinely despised pickles, not as a mild preference, but as a real and visceral aversion. The multiple takes required to film the sequence meant that Howard had to eat pickles again and again, take after take, in a scenario that was genuinely unpleasant for him physically. And doing all of that while performing opposite an actress who radiated no particular warmth or comfort in his direction made the whole experience something that stayed with him. It was the kind of small misery that lodges itself in memory precisely because it sits at the intersection of professional obligation and personal discomfort. The friction that Ron Howard experienced with Frances Bavier was, it turns out, part of a much larger and more complicated relational landscape on that set. Because while Bavier and young Howard simply failed to connect, the tension between Bavier and Andy Griffith himself ran considerably deeper and lasted considerably longer. Griffith and Bavier were fundamentally different people who happened to be thrown together in one of the most successful television productions in the history of the medium. Griffith was gregarious, instinctive, and naturally sociable. He was the kind of performer who thrived on connection and who used real, human warmth as the fuel for his artistic work. Bavier was reserved, formal, and intensely private. She did not want colleagues showing up unannounced in her personal life, and she did not particularly seek out the kind of easy, off-set camaraderie that Griffith both offered and preferred. The tension between them simmered throughout the entire run of the show, mostly contained but never truly resolved. There is a well-documented account of Griffith once attempting to visit Bavier at her home unannounced, motivated by a genuine desire to bridge the gap between them and address the friction that had accumulated over years of working together. The visit did not go well. Bavier, caught off guard and feeling her carefully protected privacy had been invaded, did not respond to the gesture in the spirit in which it was intended. Rather than serving as a thaw, the encounter apparently deepened the chill between them. For years, this feud remained one of Hollywood's quieter open secrets, known to those close to the production but not widely discussed in public. It complicated the rosy mythology that had built up around the show, the idea that these performers really were the close-knit family they portrayed. The reality, as is so often the case, was more human and more complicated than that. The story, however, does not end in permanent estrangement, and that matters enormously to understanding its full human dimension. Frances Bavier retired from acting in 1972 and relocated to Siler City, North Carolina, a small and quiet town not entirely unlike the fictional Mayberry she had inhabited for 8 years on screen. She lived there privately, largely out of the public eye, and by most accounts found genuine peace and community in the kind of small-town environment her most famous character had always called home. In the final period of her life, Bavier was dealing with serious health complications. The illness that occupied her final years brought with it, as illness often does, a quality of reflection and reconsideration. She had time to look back on her life, her career, and the relationships that had defined both. And somewhere in that process, she picked up the phone and called Andy Griffith. After all the years of distance and cold professionalism and unresolved tension, she called him and she apologized. By Griffith's own account, she was sincere and direct. She acknowledged that she had been difficult. She credited Griffith's leadership as the central ingredient in the show's extraordinary success. She told him she was sorry they had not gotten along better, and she accepted responsibility for her part in that failure. It was a remarkable moment, and Griffith received it as such. Frances Bavier passed away in 1989 at the age of 86. The reconciliation that happened in her final chapter did not erase the years of tension, but it gave the story a human ending that reflected the complexity of who both of these people truly were. They were flawed, talented, and ultimately capable of grace. Ron Howard carried those early experiences with him as he grew. First into the second major chapter of his acting career as Richie Cunningham on Happy Days throughout the 1970s, and then into his true calling behind the camera. Howard has often spoken about how much of what he learned about storytelling, human nature, and the complicated dynamics of creative collaboration he absorbed during those early years